Hey guys, it's Kevin here, the Patriot Punk, and today I have a video that was recommended by a viewer for me to debunk. So let's get on with it.
Hello everyone.
Hello back at you.
As you would know, rightists like to point to Venezuela as a modern example of democratic socialism.
Well, I am a rightist, but I would not call Venezuela democratic socialism. There is nothing democratic about what happens in Venezuela. In fact, there's nothing democratic about socialism in general.
However, what they will not tell you is that Venezuela's economy has always been dominated by the private sector.
So I wonder what he means when he says the private sector dominates Venezuela. Because if I want to dominate a country, I would go and buy their energy companies, I would buy their agriculture companies, I would buy their oil companies, I would buy their mining companies. And all those are owned by the state in Venezuela, not the private sector. I would also want to buy the banks first and foremost, but those are nationalized in Venezuela. And I would want to buy the media company so I could convince the populace that everything is great while I dominate them. But the state is already doing that. So I think maybe this guy used the word dominate wrong. Here's an example of how to use dominate. Kevin, the Patriot Punk, just dominated you in this rebuttal.
That's right, more than two-thirds of Venezuela's industry remained in private hands under Hugo Chavez.
Well, how generous of the government to only take over 1/3 of all companies and only take over those most important ones. Here's the thing, guys. We're supposed to be talking about socialism, and socialism does not mean you go in and take over every single company right away. That would be communism or a communist revolution. Socialism is a gradual process of nationalization and redistribution of wealth leading to communism. Communism would be when all the companies are nationalized and the people own all the means of production. Well, that would never happen because, as you can see, even nationalizing a few companies leads to the destruction of a country. So if they'd come in and nationalize, let's say, 2/3 or even 1/2 of all the companies, the country would have crashed just that much faster. So it's a ridiculous argument, and it's not socialism. And for that matter, it's not democratic socialism either.
This has been noted by academic papers and right-wing and left-wing news outlets. The Venezuelan economy remains dominated by capitalists.
So it's funny because he says all these right-wing sites are saying that Venezuela is not really socialism. And the only article I could find was the one he linked to, in which it shows in the byline that this wasn't a Fox Business article. It was just something they picked up from the AP. And the AP picked it up from the state news agency in Venezuela.
Venezuela is also one of the few countries where the private sector dominates in the area of healthcare, smashing both the Latin American average and the OECD average in out-of-pocket private expenditure. Even the pro-Chavista Telesur website acknowledges that the Venezuelan government continues to subsidize private health clinics, lamenting that old habits die hard.
So this is true for every socialist country where the government still allows private hospitals to exist. And that's a lot of them, guys. You'd be surprised. Many socialist countries do let private sector hospitals exist because these hospitals draw in medical tourism and a lot of money. The fact is that the left do not want to admit is that they want rich people to keep coming into these countries because the second that the rich people stop coming in, they are just that much more worse off. And many people in these countries will do anything to avoid going to the public sector hospitals. So if they shut down those private hospitals, they would have some riots on their hands. Because just look at these pictures, you'll see the difference. Public sector, private sector in Venezuela.
Furthermore, only around 20 to 25% of the workforce is employed in the Venezuelan public sector, whilst the rest work in the private and informal sectors.
So he's right, guys. The public sector jobs in the UK make up about 20% of the workforce, which is very high, and that is about the same as Venezuela. The difference between the UK and Venezuela is that Venezuela nationalized all the companies that drove their economy. And they did this because they thought they would be able to do a better job running these companies. And all they did was run these companies into the ground. Now, these companies built wealth for these two countries. The private sector built wealth for both these countries. In the UK, they decided, well, we're not going to nationalize these companies because we're not socialists, We're just going to tax them to death. And that's what they're doing. They are taxing them to death, and they are using that to pay for this huge public sector workforce. But that too will kill the country. It'll just die a lot more slowly than Venezuela has died.
Public sector employment in France, Britain, Norway, Sweden and Denmark is actually higher, and they are hardly socialist states.
Well, I agree with him here too. Those countries are not socialist. Although the left love to call these countries democratic socialist countries, they're not really. Okay, they are capitalist countries that have implemented some left-wing policies. And the fact is, they are suffering because of those left-wing policies. All you have to do is look at the stats from Sweden 20 years ago versus Sweden today, and you will see that just a dash, just a little pinch of socialism can do a lot of damage.
So whilst it should be noted that the Chavez government did try to expand public healthcare and bring industries into public ownership, the private sector continued to dominate the economy. Of course, this brings a lot of problems. Since capitalists have such control of the economy, they can use their resources to destroy a left-leaning government.
So this is a perfect example of how leftists always project. That's the number one rule of the left, right? Leftists always project. And this guy is projecting onto capitalists what socialists and communists actually do, which is they meet in private, they go to these closed bookstores and basement meetings, and they plot how to overthrow a capitalist society. But capitalists, we don't have to meet in secret to plot to overthrow socialism. It destroys itself. We just have to wait.
We saw such capitalist destabilization in Chile in the 1970s, where there was massive hoarding, sabotage, and bosses' strikes that were designed to destroy the Allende government. When the Allende government was overthrown, the shops were full of food the very next day.
What they did, and that's why I think one has to get the story very straight, they created destabilization. There was economic turmoil in Chile. There was a trucking strike, which was very important for Chile because we're a very long country. We're like a spaghetti, we're so long. And our highways are basic, and trucking is basic. And trucks stopped because they were paid not to work. And they received more pay not working than working.
So this is just a silly observation on my part, but if somebody is paying you not to work, you're still working. You're an employee of the person who's paying you not to drive your truck. And I think it's a funny little allegory for communism or socialism versus capitalism. The free market is when you have a person who's paying you better than the other guys, and you go up to them and you say, hey, I want to work for you. They pay you willingly, you accept willingly, and everybody benefits. Except for the socialists who are trying to railroad the economy by forcing participation.
One of the reasons for this was that Allende did not destroy the economic power of the capitalists in Chile. Indeed, one of the reasons why Fidel Castro was so successful is that he knew what needed to be done to establish socialism. Smash the economic power of the capitalists and their US allies.
So I guess by smash opposition, he means you go into a country, you kill everybody who opposes you, you steal all their land, you implement a totalitarian state that controls every aspect of human life, you run the economy into the ground, and then you don't let anyone leave or see anything from the outside for the next 50 years. And that's how you smash capitalism, right? Yeah, sounds like a utopia.
Understandably, Chavez and Maduro followed the same path as Allende, because they were restrained by a false democracy. The reason why I say that democracy is false, because the will of the majority can be restrained by the capitalist structures. For example, say if the majority voted for a socialist party in order to bring the means of production into public ownership. In a so-called capitalist democracy, the capitalists would be able to take the government to court and win, ignoring the will of the people.
So here's the funny thing, right? He's complaining about how democracy works because when you have a democracy, you still have minority groups in that democracy who are going to vote the other way. But he opposes that. But I guarantee you he would also oppose it if the majority group voted against socialism, which also happens even in socialist countries. They will vote against more nationalization once they see how bad the outcome is. And I guarantee you he would be against that. And he would still complain because the left, they don't like democracy. Okay, they like democracy when it goes their way. But just as we saw in California with gay marriage, just as we see in the EU and with things like Brexit, they hate it when democracy does not work in their favor. So what they really want is an authoritarian state where they have a left-wing dictator, or like the EU, a technocratic dictatorship, and they want to be able to step on the necks of the opposition.
Don't get me wrong, I really hope that Maduro triumphs over the Venezuelan reactionaries, but you would be totally wrong to call modern Venezuela socialist. More than 2/3 of the economy is privately owned. Private expenditure, out-of-pocket expenses on healthcare in Venezuela, accounts for 55.1% of total expenditure on health. The OECD average is 27.5%. And the vast majority of Venezuelan workers still work for the private sector.
So here he ends his video abruptly after stating the same arguments he made in the very beginning of this video. Now he shows you again these stats on public ownership. And again, I'll tell you guys, there's no metric for socialism as far as public ownership goes. Socialism is just the gradual nationalization of companies until all private ownership is in the public hands. That said, Venezuela went after the major companies that really hold the economy of that country together. And that's something that does not happen in Western countries. We have not nationalized any of our major companies. And that is really what's kept us from entering full-fledged socialism. Now, I want to tell you guys, he makes this argument that that's not democratic socialism, but we hear this argument all the time about Marxism, that that's not real Marxism, that's not real communism, that's not real socialism. That's what leftists say every time socialism or Marxism fails, every time those policies start to destroy a country. And I gotta tell you, having lived in Central America and South America, I know what it's like to live in these countries. And I know the kind of governments they have in those countries. And the people there, they very much believe that they are real socialists. They believe that they are implementing real socialism. Just like the Bolsheviks thought they were real socialists. Just like Chairman Mao thought he was implementing real socialism. You see where I'm going with this? It's only fake socialism when it fails. And because it fails every time, you hear the argument, we've never seen real socialism because capitalist countries always stop it from happening. So my only question to socialists like this guy is, what policy would you implement that would save a country like Venezuela from total failure? Would it be to kick out all the capitalists? And why is it that a capitalist country like the United States of America can function with socialists and Marxists being subversive, trying to destroy the country from within? We still survive off the merits of capitalism. Why can't those countries survive off the merits of socialism? Guys, I was tired of doing gun videos. My voice was going because I was yelling so much into this microphone about these idiot kids out there marching against our Second Amendments. And it's infuriating. So I decided to do a video like this. I'd like you guys to let me know what you think about me doing these economic videos. I like to talk about the cultural side of Marxism, the critical theory stuff, but I don't do a lot of stuff on the economic end of things. So let me know what you think. Go check out both my channels on YouTube, The Patriot Punk and InfoWars Stop the Purge. And I will link my Twitter and Facebook in the description below. Also, check out my Facebook group, The Patriot Punk. I open it up for everybody. And go check out Dapperton's channel too, The Liberty Network. I hope you enjoy. I'm out.